I stood there, frozen, my small suitcase clutched in trembling hands, as my son Michael's words cut through me like winter wind. "Show me your bank balance before you sit down." The rose I had carefully wrapped in tissue paper, Andrew's favorite, the first bloom of spring from our garden, suddenly felt heavy in my coat pocket. Just hours ago, I had snipped it with such hope, such foolish optimism, imagining it would grace my new beginning in Michael's home. Now it seemed to mock my naivety. "Mom!" Michael's voice was sharp, impatient. Behind him, Sarah, my daughter-in-law, hovered in the shadowy hallway, her arms crossed. Neither of them had hugged me. Neither had smiled. The $500,000 from selling my home, our home, Andrew's and mine, suddenly felt like a weight around my neck rather than the security blanket I'd imagined. I fumbled with my phone, hands shaking as I pulled up my banking app. The screen's glow illuminated Michael's face as he leaned in, his eyes scanning the numbers with an intensity that made my stomach turn. Was this really my son? The same little boy who used to climb into my lap with picture books, who would bring me dandelion bouquets and call them treasure. "The basement room is ready," Sarah announced, her voice clipped and efficient. "We cleared out some of the boxes, but you'll need to work around what's left. The humidity shouldn't be too bad this time of year." The basement. Not the guest room upstairs with its window overlooking the garden. Not the sunny space where I'd imagined, sitting with my grandson Jack, teaching him to draw, or telling him stories about his grandfather. The basement, with its concrete walls and musty corners. I followed them inside, my feet moving automatically, while my mind struggled to process what was happening. The house I'd just left, the home Andrew and I had built together, where every corner held a memory of our shared life, suddenly seemed impossibly far away. The careful preparations I'd made, the excitement I'd felt about this new chapter, the dreams of family dinners and shared laughter, they all crumbled with each step down those basement stairs. A single bare bulb flickered to life as Michael pulled a chain. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, their labels faded and peeling. A narrow cot had been pushed against one wall, a thin blanket stretched across it. No window, no escape from the underground silence. "We'll need to discuss rent," Sarah said from the top of the stairs. "And utilities, of course. Everything's gotten so expensive lately." I set my suitcase down beside the cot, feeling the cold seep through my shoes from the concrete floor. In my pocket, Andrew's rose pressed against my heart, its thorns catching on the fabric. I could almost hear his voice, gentle but firm. "Stand tall, Lizzie. You're stronger than you know." But in that moment, watching my son retreat up the stairs, without a backward glance, I had never felt more alone, more betrayed or more afraid of what tomorrow might bring. That first night in the basement, sleep eluded me. The unfamiliar creaks of pipes and the distant hum of the heating system seemed to whisper memories of the life I'd left behind. Just 3 days ago, I'd stood in my garden in Portland, surrounded by the roses Andrew and I had tenderly cultivated over 30 years of marriage. I remember the day we bought that house, both of us barely in our 20s, full of dreams and determination. Andrew had worked double shifts at the lumber mill to afford the down payment, coming home with sawdust in his hair and pride in his eyes. "This is our canvas," he'd say, gesturing to the untamed yard. "We'll paint it with flowers, Lizzie." And we did. Every spring brought new additions, climbing roses along the fence, herbs in terracotta pots, wildflowers that drew butterflies, and hummingbirds. Andrew carved our initials into the wooden arm of the porch swing, adding Michael's when he was born. That swing still held the impression of countless summer evenings, the three of us sharing ice cream and watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolor hues. Rolling over on the narrow cot, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos of our home, now someone else's home. The kitchen where I'd taught Michael to bake his father's favorite apple pie. The living room where Andrew would sit in his leather armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose, working on crossword puzzles. The garden where he'd spent his final days, insisting on tending to his beloved roses even as his strength waned. 3 years. 3 years since I lost him to cancer, watching helplessly as it consumed him bit by bit. Even then, he never lost his gentle humor. "Don't let our garden fade, Lizzie," he'd whispered one evening, his hand trembling as he pointed to the rose bushes outside our bedroom window. "They're like our love stories. They need attention to bloom." I tried to keep that promise. I really did. But the silence in the house grew deafening. Every morning I'd wake to the methodical ticking of Andrew's old clock, marking not just time but the growing weight of his absence. The garden flourished under my care, but inside I was withering. When Michael's message came suggesting I move closer to help with Jack, it felt like a lifeline. I could picture it so clearly. Sharing breakfast with my grandson, teaching him about his grandfather's roses, being part of a family again. The house sold quickly, the market was good, and the location desirable. Nearly $500,000 felt like enough to ensure I wouldn't be a burden, maybe even enough to help Michael if he needed it. The real estate agent had been effusive about my garden. "Such care, such attention to detail," she'd marveled. If only she knew each flower held a story, each plant a memory. The white roses by the gate, Andrew planted those the day Michael graduated high school. The climbing vines along the fence, our 20th anniversary project. The herb garden, started when Michael was young and wanted to grow his own pizza toppings. Now, lying in this basement room, surrounded by dusty boxes and concrete walls, those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life. The woman who tended that garden, who built that home with Andrew, who raised Michael with such hope and love. How did she end up here, counting coins for rent in her own son's basement? A sound from upstairs made me start. Footsteps, then voices. Michael and Sarah discussing finances. Their words drifted down through the heating vent. "The market's crazy right now. Could have gotten more for that house. Need to make sure we're compensated for utilities." I pressed my face into the thin pillow, trying to muffle their voices, trying to hold on to the warmth of my memories instead of the cold reality of my present. In my pocket, I could feel the tissue paper crinkling around Andrew's rose. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would find a small vase for it. Tomorrow I would try to understand what had happened to the little boy who once brought me dandelion bouquets. The manipulation revealed itself in small ways at first, like water dripping from a faulty tap. Each morning, Sarah would leave a stack of bills on the kitchen counter while I made my breakfast. Internet fees, heating costs, grocery calculations. The numbers seemed to grow with each passing day, accompanied by pointed sighs and whispered phone calls. I was washing dishes one morning, my hands submerged in soapy water, when I overheard Sarah in the adjacent room. "Of course, we'll get access to the account eventually," she was saying to someone. "Michael's working on it. She can't manage that kind of money at her age." My fingers tightened around a plate, and I had to remind myself to breathe. That same afternoon, Michael called me into his home office, once a nursery where I'd rocked him to sleep. The room had been stripped of all warmth, replaced with cold metal furniture and a wall of financial charts. "Mom," he began, not looking up from his computer, "we need to discuss power of attorney." Power of attorney. The words felt foreign on my tongue. "It's just practical," he continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to dread. You're not getting any younger. And with Dad gone..." He finally looked up, his eyes calculating. "We need to protect your assets. Our financial advisor suggests..." "Your financial advisor?" I interrupted, surprising us both. "When did you speak to a financial advisor about my money?" A flash of annoyance crossed his face. "Mom, be reasonable. You're living under our roof now. We need to make sure everything's properly managed." Properly managed. The same phrase Sarah had used when she'd reorganized my belongings, relegating most of my precious photos and mementos to boxes in the garage. Properly managed, like the strict schedule they'd created for my use of the washing machine. Properly managed, like my life was a business transaction gone slightly awry. But it was my grandson Jack who inadvertently revealed the full extent of their plans. He found me in the garden one Saturday morning, where I'd carved out a small space for myself among Sarah's immaculate but soulless landscaping. I was planting marigolds, cheap flowers from the grocery store. Nothing like my beloved roses, but they added a touch of color to my days. "Grandma," he whispered, kneeling beside me in the dirt. "Are you really going to live in a home?" My hands stilled in the soil. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking last night. They said once they get your..." He scrunched up his face, remembering. "Your power of attorney. They can sell your house money and put you somewhere nice. But I don't want you to go." The marigold in my hands trembled as Jack's words sank in. Somewhere nice. The euphemism rang hollow, like the promises that had brought me here. I looked at my grandson's worried face, so much like Michael's at that age, and felt something inside me crack. That evening, I sat alone in my basement room, surrounded by the boxes they'd never bothered to clear away. Through the heating vent, I could hear them in the kitchen above, discussing my future, as if I were a problem to be solved, an account to be managed, a burden to be shifted. "The retirement home in Rochester has an opening," Sarah was saying. "Once we secure the POA, we can liquidate her assets and we'll need to handle it carefully." Michael replied. "Make her think it's her idea." I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo of my garden back in Portland, the one I'd been too afraid to delete. The rose bushes would be blooming now, tended by new hands. What would Andrew think of all this? His voice seemed to whisper from the past. "You always were stronger than you knew, Lizzie." In the dim light of my basement refuge, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, though God knows I had reason enough for that. Not even sadness, though that was there too. No, what I felt was a quiet, steely resolve. They thought they were dealing with a feeble old woman, someone to be managed and manipulated. They had forgotten who I was, who I had always been. I reached for the rose I'd brought from home, now dried but still perfect in its way. Like me, it had been cut from its roots, but refused to wither. As I held it, I began to form a plan. They wanted to manage my life? Well, perhaps it was time I started managing it myself. That night, sleep eluded me again. But this time, it wasn't grief keeping me awake. It was clarity. As I lay in the basement darkness, listening to the house settle above me, I began to sort through the pieces of my life like a puzzle that had been scattered but not lost. I reached for my phone and opened my banking app, the same one Michael had scrutinized that first day. The numbers stared back at me. $487, $235.16 from the house sale, plus Andrew's life insurance and our modest savings. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to represent 30 years of careful living. Enough to secure my future. Enough to matter to a son who seemed to have forgotten the value of everything except money. With trembling fingers, I began to make notes in my phone. Contact bank. Monday morning. Call Margaret. When was the last time I'd spoken to my sister? Research rental properties. Find a lawyer. The last item made me pause. A lawyer. The thought would have horrified me just days ago. But now, remembering Michael's casual mention of power of attorney, Sarah's whispered phone calls, and their plans for somewhere nice, I knew I needed protection. Not from strangers, but from my own family. A sound from upstairs made me start. Jack's bedroom door creaking open, followed by the pat-pat of small feet. I heard Sarah's voice, sharp with irritation. Back to bed, Jack. Grandma doesn't need you bothering her all the time. My grandson's muffled protest was cut short by his door closing again. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. This was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing Jack that love doesn't manipulate, that strength sometimes means walking away. I opened my email and began composing a message to Margaret. We hadn't been close since Andrew's death. My fault, really. I'd wrapped myself in grief like a familiar blanket, pushing away even those who truly cared. But Margaret had never stopped trying. Never stopped sending those weekly messages I'd only half read. The guest room is always ready for you, Lizzie. As I typed, I remembered something Andrew used to say when we worked in our garden. The strongest plants, Lizzie, are the ones that know when to bend and when to stand firm. He'd been teaching me all along, I realized. All those years watching him negotiate lumber prices, handle difficult clients, stay true to his principles while navigating complex situations. They hadn't just been lessons in gardening. I finished the email to Margaret and set my phone aside, reaching instead for my old leather journal, the one Sarah had deemed unnecessary clutter and relegated to a box. In it, I began to write, not a lament, but a plan. I would need to move carefully, thoughtfully. They expected a helpless widow, so that's what I would let them see. For now. First, I would need to secure my finances without raising suspicion. I remembered Andrew setting up online banking for us, insisting I learn despite my reluctance. Technology is just a tool, Lizzie, he'd said. Like garden shears. Dangerous only if you don't know how to use it. Tomorrow I would begin moving small amounts to a new account, one deposit at a time. Next, I would need allies. Margaret, yes, but also professionals who could protect my interests. The local senior center would have resources, referrals. I could visit under the guise of joining their activities program. Keeping busy, as Sarah was always urging me to do. And Jack, my heart ached at the thought of distance from my grandson. But I knew now that staying in this basement, allowing myself to be diminished, would teach him all the wrong lessons about love and respect. In the dim light filtering through the basement window well, I looked at Andrew's dried rose, still perfect in its glass of water. Like me, it had been cut from its roots but refused to wither. Tomorrow I would begin planting new seeds. Not in earth this time, but in possibility. I closed my journal and tucked it carefully back into its box. Above me the house had grown quiet, except for the steady ticking of a clock. So like the one Andrew and I had in our bedroom. Time passing, yes, but also time beginning. Every tick a reminder. I was not just Andrew's widow, not just Michael's mother, not just Jack's grandmother. I was Elizabeth, and I had weathered storms before. As I finally drifted toward sleep, I felt a strange sense of peace. Sometimes I realized the greatest act of love is not in staying, but in finding the courage to leave. And sometimes, the quietest gardens grow the strongest roots. Monday morning dawned with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Sarah rushed around the kitchen, preparing Jack's lunch and barely acknowledging my presence, I sipped my tea and waited. The moment they left, Sarah to her real estate office, Jack to school and Michael to his investment firm, I began to move. My first stop was the local branch of my bank, just a 15-minute walk from the house. I'd told Sarah I was going to the grocery store, and the shopping bag tucked in my purse wasn't entirely a lie. I would pick up a few items later to maintain the illusion. "Mrs. Harrison?" The bank manager, Ms. Chen, smiled warmly as she read my ID. "How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and channeled Andrew's quiet confidence. "I need to discuss the security of my accounts and possibly open a new one." My voice was steady, surprising even myself. "I have concerns about unauthorized access attempts." For the next hour, Ms. Chen proved to be a godsend. She helped me set up additional security measures, created a new account at a different bank entirely, and walked me through the process of establishing secure online banking access that only I could control. "Unfortunately," she said, her expression serious, "we see this kind of situation more often than you'd think. You're doing the right thing by taking precautions." As she helped me transfer a small initial amount to the new account, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't much, just enough to give me options. But it was a start. "We can set up automatic transfers," she suggested. "Small amounts that won't trigger attention." My next stop was the senior center, where I'd spotted a legal aid poster in the window during one of my walks. The coordinator, a vibrant woman named Rita, didn't bat an eye when I explained I needed discreet legal consultation. "Tuesday mornings," she said, sliding a card across the desk. "Our volunteer lawyer specializes in elder rights, and—" She hesitated, then added more quietly, "We also have a support group. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone." I picked up groceries on my way back. Bread, milk, the exact items Sarah had suggested I buy. Playing the role of the compliant mother-in-law while secretly laying the groundwork for my independence felt strange, but also oddly empowering. I thought of the roses in my old garden, how they appeared delicate but hid thorns sharp enough to draw blood. That afternoon, while organizing the basement as Sarah had suggested, I found a box of Michael's old school things. Inside was a story he'd written in 6th grade, about me. "My mom, my hero," the title read. He'd described how I taught him to stand up to bullies, to fight for what was right, to never let fear win. When had he forgotten those lessons? When had I? My phone buzzed. A response from Margaret. "About time, little sister," she'd written. "The guest room is yours whenever you need it. No questions asked." Attached was a photo of her garden, wild and wonderful, so different from Sarah's manicured lawn. I could almost smell the herbs Margaret grew, could almost hear her laugh. Later at dinner, I watched Michael and Sarah exchange glances over their tablets, discussing their latest property investment. Jack caught my eye across the table and smiled. That pure, unguarded smile that reminded me so much of Michael, at his age. I smiled back, but my heart ached. Soon I would have to leave. But I silently promised my grandson that this time, walking away would be an act of strength, not surrender. That night, in my basement room, I updated my journal with the day's progress. My new account was set up. Legal aid was arranged. Margaret's door was open. Small steps, quiet steps, but steps nonetheless. I touched the dried rose from my garden, now pressed between the pages of my journal. "You'd be proud," I whispered to Andrew's memory. "I'm learning to tend to myself the way we tended our garden. With patience, with care, and with the knowledge that sometimes The most important growth happens underground, where no one can see it. Above me, the house creaked and settled. Sarah and Michael's voices drifted down, discussing power of attorney paperwork, their tones confident, assured of their planned success. They had no idea that while they plotted, I was quietly growing, stronger, like a seedling pushing through concrete, reaching for the light. The following week passed in a strange dance of pretense and preparation. Each morning I played my part, the compliant mother who needed guidance, the widow who couldn't possibly understand modern finances. But beneath that carefully maintained facade, I was quietly building my escape route, one piece at a time. Tuesday morning's meeting with the legal aid lawyer, Mr. Patterson, was eye-opening. "They can't force you to sign anything," he explained, his kind eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Power of attorney is your choice, not theirs, and any attempt to coerce you could be considered elder abuse." The word abuse made me flinch, but he wasn't finished. "Based on what you've told me, Mrs. Harrison, they're laying groundwork. The isolation in the basement, the financial pressure, the subtle threats about care homes. These are red flags we see often." I thought of the latest bill Sarah had left on my desk that morning. A detailed breakdown of utilities, including charges for water usage when I did laundry. The amounts were clearly inflated, designed to chip away at my savings bit by bit. "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything," he advised, sliding a small notebook across the desk. "Times, dates, conversations. Keep copies of any papers they give you. And whatever you do, don't sign anything without legal review." That afternoon, while Sarah was showing houses and Michael was at work, I sat with Jack in the kitchen. He was working on his homework, a creative writing assignment about family. "Grandma," he asked suddenly, "why do Mom and Dad want your money?" The innocent question caught me off guard. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" "I heard them talking again." He looked down at his paper, his small hands fidgeting with his pencil. "Dad said something about securing their future, but isn't it your future too?" In that moment, I saw myself through my grandson's eyes, not as the helpless widow Michael and Sarah wanted me to be, but as someone worthy of protection, someone he instinctively knew was being wronged. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "grown-ups forget what's really important. They get so focused on one thing that they lose sight of everything else. Like when Dad stopped coming to my baseball games because of work?" My heart clenched. "Yes, something like that." Jack was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is that why you're planning to leave?" I froze. "What makes you think that?" "You're different now," he said simply. "You smile more, but it's a quiet smile, like you know a secret. And you write in your journal every night. I can see your light on through the basement window well when I'm in the backyard." Tears pricked at my eyes. How had my grandson become so perceptive while his parents had grown so blind? "Jack," I began, but he cut me off. "It's okay, Grandma. I understand. It's like in my book about the bird that had to leave its nest to find a better home. But," his voice wavered slightly, "will you still be my grandma?" I pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, so like Michael's at that age. "Always and forever," I promised. Some things can never change, no matter where we are. That evening, as I sat in my basement room updating my journal, I heard Michael and Sarah in the kitchen above. Their voices were raised, unusual for them. "The lawyer says we need her to sign this week," Sarah was saying. "The care home won't hold the spot indefinitely." I know, Michael replied, frustration evident in his voice. But she's being difficult lately. Did you see how she questioned the utility bills? Then we'll need to be more persuasive. Sarah's tone sent a chill down my spine. Remember what Dr. Roberts said about her potential early dementia? My hand tightened around my pen. Dr. Roberts? Their family doctor whom I'd never met, presumably now willing to diagnose conditions I didn't have. The pieces of their plan were becoming clearer, more sinister. I opened my phone and typed a quick message to Margaret. Is that guest room still available? Her response came almost immediately. Always, sister, always. Looking around my basement room at the boxes I'd slowly been organizing, really studying what I could take and what I could leave, I felt a surge of determination. They thought they were closing in, but their pressure was only making me stronger. Like a rose bush in winter, I might appear dormant, but beneath the surface I was preparing to bloom. I touched the dried rose in my journal, my final connection to the garden Andrew and I had built together. Soon, very soon, I would need to make my move. But this time, I wouldn't be running away. I would be walking toward something. Toward dignity, toward self-respect, toward the kind of strength that comes from finally saying, enough. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after I'd arrived. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my customary cup of tea when Michael walked in, holding a thick manila envelope. Sarah followed close behind, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors with purposeful determination. Mom, Michael said, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I'd grown to dread. We need to discuss some paperwork. It's all very routine. Just some documents to help us take care of you properly. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Through the kitchen window, I could see Jack on the back porch, attempting to grow marigolds in small pots. A project we'd started together. The sight gave me strength. Of course, I said mildly, watching their shoulders relax at my apparent compliance. I'll just need to have my lawyer review them first. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the countertop. Michael's face flushed red, the same way it used to when he was a little boy caught in a lie. Your lawyer? Sarah's voice was sharp as broken glass. That won't be necessary. These are just standard forms. From Dr. Roberts? I interrupted quietly, watching their faces. The doctor I've never met, who's apparently concerned about my cognitive decline? Michael's hand tightened on the envelope. Mom, you're being paranoid. We're trying to help you. Help me into a care home? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Help yourselves to my savings. We've heard you talking to yourself, Sarah cut in. Walking around at night, writing constantly, in that journal. These are signs that I'm awake. I felt a lifetime of patience finally giving way to truth. Signs that I'm alive? What exactly is the diagnosis for a widow who dares to think for herself? This is exactly what we're worried about, Michael said, reaching across the table. You're becoming agitated, emotional. If you'd just let us handle things. The way you've handled the inflated utility bills? I pulled out my phone, opening the spreadsheet I'd created. I've documented every charge, Michael. Did you know the water bill you gave me last week was 3 times the local rate? Sarah stepped forward, her face tight with anger. You've been checking up on us? After everything we've done for you? Done for me? I stood slowly, feeling oddly calm. You've isolated me in a basement, tried to drain my savings, plotted to have me declared incompetent. Tell me, Sarah, what exactly have you done for me? We gave you a home. Michael's voice rose, his facade cracking. No, I said softly. You gave me a lesson, one I should have learned long ago. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, pressing play on the recording I'd made the night before. Their voices filling the kitchen, discussing power of attorney, care homes, and their plans for my assets. The color drained from their faces. In the sudden silence, I heard Jack's small footsteps on the back porch, his quiet humming as he tended his flowers, unaware of the storm breaking inside. I'm leaving, I said simply. Today. Margaret is expecting me. You can't, Sarah began, but I held up my hand. I not only can, I must. For Jack's sake as much as my own. I met Michael's eyes, seeing for the first time how far he'd strayed from the boy I'd raised. What lesson are we teaching him about family? About love? About respect? This is ridiculous, Michael sputtered. Where will you go? What will you do? I thought of the new bank account, already holding enough to start fresh. The apartment I'd quietly viewed near Margaret's home. The senior center's lawyer who was expecting my call. I'm going to live, Michael. Something I stopped doing when your father died. Something you've tried very hard to prevent me from starting again. I turned to leave the kitchen, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. I pulled out Mr. Patterson's business card and placed it on the table. Any future communication can go through my lawyer. He's particularly interested in discussing those fraudulent utility bills and the medical diagnoses from a doctor I've never met. As I walked toward the basement door, I heard Sarah's angry whispers and Michael's frustrated response. But over their voices, I heard something else. Jack's small footsteps following me. Grandma. His voice was quiet. Will you help me move my marigolds to their new pots before you go? I knelt down to his level, seeing in his eyes understanding far beyond his years. Of course, sweetheart. Some things need to be transplanted to grow stronger, just like your flowers, just like me. Margaret was waiting on her front porch when the taxi pulled up, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. She didn't rush, down the steps, or make a fuss. She simply stood there, solid and present, like the old maple tree that shaded her garden, a quiet strength I desperately needed. You look terrible, she said as I approached, then pulled me into a fierce hug that smelled of herbs and home-baked bread. Come inside, the kettle's on. My sister's house was everything Michael and Sarah's wasn't. Warm, lived in, imperfect in all the right ways. Books sprawled across coffee tables, half-finished knitting projects occupied comfortable chairs, and through every window glimpses of her wild, wonderful garden beckoned. I've set up the guest room, Margaret said, leading me upstairs. Though I refuse to call it that anymore. It's your room now, for as long as you need it. The room was bright, with windows that overlooked the garden. A small desk sat in one corner, and beside it, a surprise that brought tears to my eyes. A pot containing a young rosebush, its leaves green and vital. Found it at the garden center yesterday, Margaret explained. The tag said it's the same variety you and Andrew used to grow. Thought you might like to start fresh. I set my small suitcase down. Amazing how 30 years of life could be distilled into so little, and touched one of the rosebush's leaves. Margaret, don't. She cut me off gently. Don't apologize for taking so long to come. Don't thank me for doing what sisters are supposed to do. Just... She gestured to the room. Be here. Be you. That first evening passed in a blur of quiet conversation, and comfortable silences over homemade soup and fresh bread. I told Margaret everything. The basement room, the financial manipulation, the fake medical concerns. She listened without interruption, though I saw her hands clench around her spoon when I mentioned the care home plans. I should have seen it coming, I said, stirring my cooling tea. There were signs, even before Andrew passed. Stop that, Margaret said firmly. You're not responsible for their choices. But you are responsible for what you do next. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. So, little sister, what's the plan? I pulled out my journal, no longer a secret diary of pain, but a roadmap to my future. First, I've got an appointment with a senior rights lawyer next week. Not just legal aid this time, but a proper consultation. Then, I hesitated, almost embarrassed by my next dream. I saw a small retail space for rent near the community center. I've been thinking about opening a little shop, teaching people about gardens, selling supplies, maybe offering classes. I expected Margaret to question the idea, to point out the risks. Instead, she got up and rummaged in a drawer, returning with a real estate listing. 3 blocks from here, she said, sliding it across the table. Good light, decent rent, and the owner's been looking for something to benefit the community. I may have already mentioned my master gardener sister was moving to town. Margaret? I stared at her. How did you know? She smiled. Because I know you, Elizabeth. You're not just Andrew's widow or Michael's mother. You're the woman who turned a patch of dirt into a paradise, who taught an entire neighborhood about roses, who never stopped learning, growing, sharing. She squeezed my hand. The shop's just the beginning, isn't it? I nodded, thinking of the community center, where I'd found help, of other women who might need the same support. I want to volunteer at the center. Maybe start a program for others who've been through similar situations. Use what I've learned. A noise from outside interrupted us. A text notification on my phone. It was from Jack. Mom and Dad are fighting about money, but I planted the marigolds you gave me in my window box. They're doing great, Grandma. I showed Margaret the message, my heart aching. I had to leave him there. You had to show him, she corrected. You showed him that love doesn't mean submission, that strength sometimes looks like walking away, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. She gestured to the rose bush in my new room. Those blooms will come back stronger than ever, and so will you. That night, in a room filled with moonlight and possibility, I wrote in my journal one last time about the basement, about Michael, about Sarah. Then I closed that chapter and started a new one. Outside my window, Margaret's garden whispered, in the evening breeze, a symphony of herbs and flowers, each growing in its own way, in its own time. I thought of Andrew, of our garden in Portland, of all the lessons we'd learned together about patience and growth. I'm starting over, I whispered to his memory. But I'm not starting from scratch. Every flower I ever planted, every lesson we learned together, they're all still part of me. Just growing in new soil now. The rose bush by my desk cast delicate shadows on the wall. Tomorrow I would start calling about the shop. Tomorrow I would begin building something new. But tonight, in this room that smelled of lavender and possibility, I simply let myself rest, like a seed finally planted in fertile ground. The retail space was smaller than my old garden, but as I stood in its empty interior, sunshine streaming through the dusty windows, I could see the possibilities blooming like spring flowers. The elderly owner, Mrs. Chen, watched me with knowing eyes as I moved through the space, already mapping it out in my mind. My mother ran a flower shop here for 40 years, she said, running her hand along a worn wooden counter. I've turned down 3 potential tenants, all wanting to turn it into another coffee shop. But a garden education center. She smiled. That feels right. The rent was reasonable, the location perfect. Just a few blocks from both Margaret's house and the senior center where I'd found my first allies. As Mrs. Chen and I shook hands over the lease agreement, she pressed a small key into my palm. It's to the back garden, she explained. Most people don't even know it's there. My mother used it for growing special orders. The back garden turned out to be a small courtyard, hidden from the street by high brick walls. Neglected but not destroyed, it held the bones of what had once been a thriving space. I could see climbing roses long gone wild, herbs pushing through cracked pavers, and in one corner, an ancient maple tree providing dappled shade. That evening, sitting at Margaret's kitchen table with papers spread around us, I began to turn dreams into plans. My sister, ever practical, had invited her friend Beth, a retired business consultant, to join us. You've got the expertise, Beth said, reviewing my gardening credentials and years of experience. And the startup costs aren't as high as you might think. The space already has good bones. What you need is a clear vision of what makes you different. I thought about my own journey, about the women I'd met at the senior center, about Jack's simple joy in growing marigolds. I want it to be more than just another garden shop, I said slowly. I want to teach people that growing things, it's about more than just plants. It's about patience, resilience, knowing when to prune and when to let things grow wild. A metaphor for life itself, Margaret mused, pouring more tea. You could partner with the senior center, offer special programs. Workshop space in the back garden, Beth added, warming to the idea. One-on-one consultations, community building. My phone buzzed. Another text from Jack. Dad threw away my first marigold plant because it got dirt on the porch. But I saved seeds like you taught me. Can you help me plant them next time I see you? Something clicked into place. The resilient garden, I said suddenly. That's what I'll call it. A place where people learn not just how to grow plants, but how to grow stronger themselves. Beth started writing rapidly. Perfect. We can work with that. Classes on sustainable gardening, yes, but also workshops on personal growth. Partner with local therapists, maybe. Gardening as healing. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Margaret's network of friends proved invaluable. An accountant who helped me set up the business properly. A handyman who repaired the courtyard's irrigation system. A graphic designer who created a simple but elegant logo. Air rose blooming through concrete. My savings, protected from Michael and Sarah's schemes, provided a comfortable cushion for startup costs. The lawyer I'd retained sent a firmly worded letter to Michael, establishing boundaries and making it clear that any attempts to interfere with my business or finances would have consequences. I received only one response from my son, a terse email claiming he had only tried to help, that I was being unreasonable, that Sarah was hurt by my accusations. I read it sitting in my slowly transforming shop, surrounded by the first delivery of plants and supplies, and felt something close to pity. They still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. The shop took shape like a garden coming to life. Local artisans, hearing about my vision, brought handcrafted pots and tools to sell. On consignment, the back garden, cleared of debris and thoughtfully replanted, became a peaceful teaching space. I hung wind chimes that Andrew had made years ago, their gentle music a reminder that he was somehow still part of this new beginning. One morning, as I was setting up for our first official workshop, growing through life's seasons, I heard the bell above the shop door chime. A woman about my age stood there, clutching a newspaper clipping about the resilient garden. "My daughter," she said hesitantly. "She wants me to move in with her family. Says I can't manage on my own anymore. But the way she talks to me lately," she trailed off, tears in her eyes. I recognized the look on her face, had seen it in my own mirror not so long ago. Taking her hand, I led her through the shop to the courtyard, where the morning sun was just touching the newly planted roses. "Let me tell you a story," I said, gesturing to a comfortable bench beneath the maple tree. "It starts in a basement room, but I promise you, that's not where it ends." The resilient garden bloomed in ways I never expected. What started as a simple garden shop became a sanctuary for others like me, women, and sometimes men, who needed to remember their own strength. Every Thursday afternoon, we held what I called growth sessions in the courtyard, where people shared their stories among the roses and herbs. "I never thought I'd start over at 65, shared Linda, a retired teacher whose adult children had tried to force her into a retirement home. She was now teaching our children's gardening workshops, helping little ones discover the magic of growing things. But here I am, covered in dirt and happier than I've been in years." The back garden had become a living testament to renewal. Along one wall, a heritage rose section displayed varieties that had survived decades, even centuries of change. Below each plant, a small plaque told its story of resilience. Visitors often stood reading these histories, finding echoes of their own journeys in the tales of flowers that refused to fade. One sunny morning, as I was arranging a new display of gardening books, including several on therapeutic horticulture, the shop's bell chimed. I looked up to see Jack, accompanied by his other grandmother, Sarah's mother, Helen. Surprise. "Grandma!" Jack rushed forward, holding a small pot with a thriving marigold plant. "Look what I grew from those seeds we saved." Helen hung back, looking uncertain. I'd only met her a few times at family gatherings, where she'd always seemed overshadowed by Sarah's dominant personality. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly. "Jack begged to visit and I've been curious about what you've created. Here." I led them both to the courtyard, watching Jack's eyes widen at the transformation of what had once been a neglected space. "Can I show Gran Helen my special spot?" he asked excitedly. "Of course, sweetheart." I smiled, remembering the day we'd created his garden corner, a small raised bed where children could plant and tend their own flowers. Jack had been my first young gardener, and his enthusiasm had inspired the whole children's program. As Jack showed Helen his plantings, carefully explaining each one just as I'd taught him, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Sarah and Michael, they don't know I'm here. They've forbidden any contact, but..." She paused, watching Jack tenderly water his marigolds. "They're wrong, Elizabeth. What they tried to do to you. I should have spoken up." I touched her arm gently. "You're speaking up now." "Jack talks about you all the time," she continued. "About the lessons you taught him, not just about gardening, but about standing up for what's right. Sarah gets so angry when he mentions you, but he won't stop. He's as stubborn as his grandfather that way." The mention of Andrew made me smile. I could almost hear his voice. "The strongest plants break through concrete, Lizzie. Just like the strongest hearts break through fear." Later that afternoon, after Jack and Helen had left, with promises to return, I sat in my favorite spot under the maple tree, updating the journal that had once been my secret rebellion and was now a record of triumph. The shop had just been featured in the local newspaper's community section. The Resilient Garden, where growth begins again. The article had brought in a flood of new visitors, including several social workers who wanted to incorporate gardening therapy into their programs. Next week, we were starting a new workshop series, Planting Your Future Financial Independence for Seniors. The irony of teaching others what I'd had to learn the hard way wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Turn on the local news. There, to my amazement, was a feature about community gardens and senior empowerment, with the Resilient Garden highlighted as a model program. The reporter interviewed several of our regular participants, including Linda, who declared proudly, "This place taught me that it's never too late to bloom." As I closed the shop that evening, I noticed a small package by the door. Inside was a handmade card from Jack, decorated with pressed marigold petals. "Dear Grandma," he'd written in his careful third-grade handwriting. "Mom and Dad still won't talk about you, but Gran Helen says you're the bravest person she knows. She says sometimes the strongest people are the ones who walk away. I'm growing my marigold strong, just like you. Love, Jack." I added the card to my journal, next to the dried rose from my old garden. Both were reminders of endings that had become beginnings, of roots that had found new soil. Through the shop window, I could see the sunset painting the courtyard in shades of gold and pink. The wind chimes Andrew had made singing softly in the evening breeze. "You were right, my love," I whispered to his memory. "The strongest growth often comes after the hardest pruning." In the growing dusk, the roses we'd planted cast long shadows across the courtyard's paths, their blooms promising another day of beauty tomorrow. 6 months after opening the Resilient Garden, I received an email that made my heart stop. My old house in Portland was back on the market. The young couple who had bought it were relocating to Florida, and they wanted to sell it quietly, through a private auction, to someone who would appreciate its special character. I sat in my office above the shop, surrounded by the gentle chaos of dried herbs and garden plans, staring at the screen. Through my window, I could see the courtyard, where a gardening through grief session was taking place, led by a grief counselor who had become one of our most valued partners. "You don't have to decide right now," Margaret said when I called her. "But Elizabeth, maybe this isn't just about the house. Maybe it's about reclaiming something that was taken from you." That evening, as I watered the roses in the courtyard, I thought about cycles and seasons, about endings that become beginnings. The shop had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We now had partnerships with 3 senior centers, 2 domestic violence shelters, and a youth program. Next month, I was scheduled to give a talk at a conference about horticultural therapy and senior empowerment. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Sarah's trying to buy your old house. She doesn't know I know, but I overheard her talking about turning it into a rental property. She keeps saying it would be the perfect revenge." Perfect revenge. The phrase settled like a stone in my stomach. I thought of my garden there, Andrew's garden, our garden, being paved over for parking spaces or left to wither under neglect. I thought of all the memories soaked into that soil, all the lessons learned among those roses. The next morning, I met with Beth, my business advisor and my lawyer. The shop was doing well enough that, combined with my protected savings, I could make a competitive bid on the house. But did I want to? Was looking backward the right way to grow forward? "You've built something beautiful here," Beth said, gesturing to the thriving shop around us. "But who says you can't nurture more than one garden?" That afternoon, during a break between workshops, I submitted my bid. I didn't tell anyone except Margaret and my lawyer. Let Sarah play her games. I had learned to fight differently now. A week later, I received another email. I had won the auction. Sarah's bid, it turned out, had fallen short. Her real estate. Market calculations hadn't accounted for the property's unique character or its carefully maintained gardens. I kept the news to myself for a few days, letting it settle like a seed in fertile soil. During that time, I watched my current garden thrive. Linda teaching a group of children about butterflies, a domestic violence survivor, finding peace among the herbs, Helen and Jack making their weekly visit to tend his expanding garden plot. Then, one quiet evening, I gathered some of my closest allies in the courtyard. Margaret, Beth, Linda, Helen, and a few others who had become like family. Jack was there too, proudly serving cookies he had baked himself. "I've bought my old house back," I announced, watching their faces in the gentle glow of the courtyard lights. But not to move back, not to look backward. I pulled out the plans I'd been working on. I want to turn it into a second resilient garden location, a place where the work we're doing here can grow and spread. The excitement was immediate. Linda offered to help set up the children's program there. Beth started talking about grant possibilities for expanded services. Helen, who I'd learned had a background in social work before Sarah pressured her to retire, quietly offered to help, coordinate with local senior services. "Can I help too, Grandma?" Jack asked, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I know that garden. Mom and Dad drive past it sometimes, and I remember all the stories you told me about the roses." I hugged him close, breathing in the scent of cookie dough and garden dirt that clung to his clothes. "Of course you can, sweetheart. That garden is part of your history, too." Later that night, I sat in my office completing the paperwork for the purchase. Through the window, Andrew's wind chimes sang in the evening breeze. I thought about the rose I'd cut from our garden that day I left for Michael's house, now pressed and preserved in my journal, a reminder of how far I'd come. My phone lit up with a notification, an angry email from Sarah, full of accusations and threats about the house purchase. But her words had lost their power to hurt me. I deleted it without responding, and instead opened the text from Jack that followed. "Dad's really mad about the house, but Gran Helen told me something important. She said sometimes the best way to heal a hurt is to turn it into help for others. Is that what you're doing, Grandma?" I looked out at the courtyard, where the roses Andrew and I had loved so much were blooming again in new soil. "Yes," I whispered, both to Jack and to Andrew's memory. "That's exactly what we're doing." In my journal, beside the pressed rose, from my past I added a fresh petal from the courtyard garden. Old and new, past and future, loss and growth, all part of the same continuing story. The house that had seen my happiness, then my grief, then my exodus, would now become another place of healing and hope. Sarah's perfect revenge had transformed into something she could never understand, a perfect renewal. Not just for me, but for everyone who would find their way to that garden, looking for their own path to resilience. I knew the confrontation was coming. Sarah's angry emails had escalated, and Helen warned me that Michael was beyond furious about losing the house. They arrived at the Resilient Garden on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, bursting through the door like storm clouds. "How dare you!" Sarah's voice rang through the shop, startling a group of elderly women examining herb seedlings. "That house was supposed to be our investment property." I continued misting the orchids, my movements deliberate and calm. "The house was never yours, Sarah. You didn't inherit it, and you couldn't afford to buy it." "Mom." Michael stepped forward, using that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. "This is childish revenge. You're trying to hurt us because you imagine we wronged you somehow." I set down my mister and turned to face them. Through the shop window, I could see Linda quickly ushering our customers into the courtyard, protecting them from the scene. Imagine. I kept my voice level. Should we discuss the basement room, the fraudulent utility bills, the plans for power of attorney and the care home? We were trying to help you. Sarah's voice rose higher. No, I said firmly. You were trying to help yourselves. To my home, to my savings, to my dignity. But that's not how this story ends. We're your family, Michael insisted, but his voice wavered slightly. Yes, you are. Which is why the house will remain in the family. Just not the way you planned. I handed them a brochure we just had printed. The Resilient Garden, Portland location, a center for healing and growth. They stared at the pamphlet, at the beautiful photos of the garden they'd hoped to pave over, now transformed into a promise of hope for others. You're turning it into another shop? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Playing gardener with a bunch of old ladies. I'm turning it into a legacy, I corrected her. A place where people learn to grow through their struggles, to bloom despite those who try to cut them down. I met Michael's eyes. Your father would have understood. Something flickered across my son's face. Pain, recognition, shame. But Sarah grabbed his arm before he could speak. This isn't over, she snapped, pulling him toward the door. Actually, it is, I said quietly. My lawyer will be in touch if you attempt to interfere with either location. After they left, Margaret emerged from the back office where she'd been listening. You okay? I touched one of Andrew's wind chimes, letting its gentle music center me. You know what? I really am. They can't hurt me anymore. Not because I'm stronger, though I am, but because I finally understand something. What's that? That the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well and helping others do the same. Through the window, I watched Linda leading our customers back inside, all of them casting concerned glances my way. In the courtyard, the roses Andrew had taught me to tend swayed in the breeze, their blooms facing the sun, growing exactly as they were meant to. The opening day of the Resilient Gardens Portland location dawned bright and clear. Standing in my old garden, now beautifully restored and enhanced with new plantings, I felt Andrew's presence more strongly than ever. The rose bushes we'd planted together had been carefully preserved and integrated into the new design, their blooms a bridge between past and present. Helen had worked tirelessly alongside me for weeks, helping to transform the house into a welcoming space for workshops and counseling sessions. The living room where Andrew used to do his crosswords was now a sunny classroom. Our old bedroom had become a quiet room for one-on-one sessions, and the kitchen still smelled of herbs, though now they were being dried for therapeutic gardening, classes rather than Sunday dinners. Grandma! Jack's voice carried across the garden. He was proudly showing a group of children his special project, a butterfly garden he'd designed himself. Can I tell them about the monarch eggs we found yesterday? Local media had gathered for the opening, but they weren't interested in just another business launch. They wanted to know about the women who had started showing up days ago, drawn by word of mouth, each carrying their own stories of recovery and renewal. I left my son's house 3 weeks ago, one woman told a reporter, her hands dirty from helping us plant the new community vegetable garden. He was doing the same thing, to me, trying to take control of my life, my money. But then I heard about Elizabeth's story, about this place. Linda had taken charge of the children's program at both locations, her teacher's heart finding new purpose in helping young people connect with nature. Every child who learns to nurture a plant, she told me, learns to nurture themselves. As I prepared to give my opening remarks, I saw an unexpected figure hovering at the garden gate. Michael. He stood alone, without Sarah, looking uncertain. Our eyes met across the blooming garden, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little boy who used to help me plant marigolds. I nodded slightly, and he entered, moving carefully between the flower beds, as if afraid to disturb anything. He stopped before the rosebush Andrew had planted the day he was born. Still thriving, still blooming. "I remember this one," he said softly when I approached. "Dad used to say it was as stubborn as me." He touched a petal gently. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything." "Sarah and we're in counseling now," Helen insisted. I waited, letting him find his words among the roses that had witnessed his childhood. "I lost myself somewhere along the way," he continued. "Forgot what you and Dad taught me about what really matters." He gestured to the transformed garden around us. "But you found a way to make something beautiful out of our mistakes." Before I could respond, Jack came running up. "Dad, you came. Can I show you my butterfly garden? Grandma taught me all about native plants and beneficial insects and..." Michael looked at me, question and hope in his eyes. I smiled and nodded. "Show your father what you've created, Jack. Sometimes the best way to understand growth is to see it through a child's eyes." As I watched them walk away together, Jack chattering excitedly about his plants, I felt a shift in the garden's energy, like the moment when spring finally overcomes winter. Not everything broken could be fixed, but new growth could always find its way through the cracks. Margaret appeared at my side, camera in hand. "Ready for the official opening?" I looked around at the garden filled with people finding their way to healing. At my grandson teaching his father about butterflies. At the roses Andrew and I had planted now helping others bloom. "Yes," I said, touching the dried rose in my pocket one last time before letting it go. "It's time for a new season." 1 year after opening the Portland location, I stood in the courtyard of the original Resilient Garden, surrounded by the evening's golden light. The space was filled with people gathering for our first annual Celebration of Growth ceremony, an idea that had sprung from our community's desire to mark their journeys of transformation. Linda moved through the crowd, pinning small rows, boutonnieres on each guest. Each bloom had been carefully chosen from both gardens, representing the bridge we'd built between past and present, between hurt and healing. Helen helped arrange chairs around the central fountain, while Margaret adjusted the lighting she'd strung through the maple tree's branches. Jack, now a year older and infinitely wiser in the ways of gardens, was proudly showing off the memory wall we'd created together, photographs and stories of transformation, each one a testament to resilience. His butterfly garden had inspired similar projects at both locations, and today dozens of monarchs danced through the air, their orange wings catching the light like flying flames. "Grandma," he called out, waving me over. "Look who's here." Michael stood at the entrance, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The counseling had helped, as had the slow, careful rebuilding of our relationship through shared work in the gardens. Sarah hadn't come around yet. Maybe she never would. But Michael had found his way back to the person he used to be, one planted seed at a time. "I brought something," he said softly, holding out a small weathered box. "Found it while cleaning out my garage." Inside was Andrew's old gardening journal, filled with his careful notes about each rose variety, each season's lessons. "Thought it belonged here now." Before I could respond, Rita from the senior center called everyone to attention. It was time for the ceremony to begin. I moved to the center of the courtyard, looking out at the faces gathered there. Each one carrying a story of renewal, each one part of this garden's growing legacy. "A year ago," I began, "I thought I was starting over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But what I've learned, what we've all learned together, is that nothing truly valuable is ever really lost. Like the roses that return each spring, strength and dignity can bloom again, often in unexpected places." I gestured to the thriving gardens around us. "In both our locations, we've created more than just beautiful spaces. We've built sanctuaries where people can rediscover their worth, reconnect with their power, and remember that it's never too late to grow in a new direction." The setting sun painted the courtyard in shades of amber and rose, catching the tears on more than a few faces. These weren't tears of sadness, though. They were tears of recognition, of shared understanding, of hope realized. "Each of you," I continued, "has added something precious to these gardens. Your stories have become part of our soil, your courage part of our strength, and together we've proven that the most resilient gardens aren't the ones that never face storms. They're the ones that learn to dance in the rain." As if on cue, Andrew's wind chimes began to sing in the evening breeze. I touched the small locket I wore, containing a single dried petal from that first rose I'd taken from our old garden. That rose had been a goodbye, but it had also been a beginning. Someone very wise once told me that the strongest plants break through concrete, I said, smiling at Jack, who was now standing beside his father. "But what I've learned is that they don't do it alone. They grow through together, supporting each other, creating beauty in the most unexpected places." The light was fading now, but the garden glowed with tiny lights Margaret had woven through. The plants. In their soft illumination, I could see the faces of my new family, the women who had found their strength here, the children who were learning to grow true to themselves, the helpers who had become healers. So tonight, we celebrate not just our individual journeys, but the garden we've grown together, a garden of second chances, of renewed hope, of resilient hearts blooming brave and true. As my words faded into the evening air, the wind chimes sang again, and I could have sworn I heard Andrew's voice in their music. "Well done, Lizzie. Well done." I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.